Everyone loves playing these super popular champions, but are there other choices that are played way less that can actually be easier to win with? Well, the answer is yes, and these champions here today in this video are having a brilliant season 2025 so far, despite not as many people playing them as they possibly should be. If you are a sucker for stats and love looking at those numbers around the meta and tier lists, then head to our website to check out all those juicy stats here, as well as stats for your own profile with detailed matchup breakdowns, so you can see not only who you have the most success with, but also which champions you personally struggle against too. Just click the link below and you can see it all for yourself. But let's get into it then, and start off in the top lane. And our first underrated pick here is Kennen. He currently has around a 51.7% win rate and about a 1.8% pick rate. Now when you compare this to those heavily contested picks like Aatrox or Darius, these both each have around an 8.5% pick rate, and that is a pretty big difference. Kennen is heavily uncontested and he's a solid blind pick to play, not to mention how well he can usually do into those popular melee picks that we just mentioned. You can also play Kennen with most drafts and most team comps, and he'll always be an amazing addition unless your team is literally full AP already. Then there's the new Axiom Arcanist rune, which allows his ultimate to hit even harder and of course makes it available more often. Realistically, I can't think of many other champions that this rune is more suited to. Our second underrated pick in the top lane is Olaf, who's maintained an impressive win rate over the last few patches as season 14 came to a close. He's currently similar to Kennen with around a 1.7% pick rate and a 51% win rate at Emerald Plus, which definitely does increase the higher you go, with him being a bit less successful at low elo. Now Olaf is a fairly one-dimensional pick. It's kinda obvious what his strengths are and what his weaknesses are. He's pretty all or nothing. Everyone knows what he's gonna do. He's gonna press R and charge at backlines or enemy side laners and basically go full send mode until he overwhelms his enemies or falls flat on his face. However, the thing is that aggressive playstyle is often working out more so than not right now. He is a solid counterpick into a bunch of CC heavy tanks and bruisers, and packs a ton of skirmishing power throughout the early game, which allows him to snowball very quickly, and we all know just how strong snowballing is in season 25 so far. Our third underrated pick to play in the top lane this season so far is Heimerdinger. Yes, you heard me correctly, the Ding Donger is in a pretty good spot so far. It is a bit of a crazy wildcard option, but when you take a closer look at the stats and when you actually sit down and think about what he's actually good at, he's kind of the perfect choice for this new heavily objective focused season. First up, he's a bit of a bully in the lane phase and can easily oppressively push and tear through enemy turrets. And we all know how important securing that first tower is now when it comes to those feats of strength. He's also amazing at fighting over objectives because he can slap his turrets down around them and pop his ultimate to make enemies take an absolute ton of damage when they try to contest them. Now Heimerdinger may fall off pretty hard outside of laning and objectives, but as long as you do play to his strengths, he can be a brilliant pocket pick to whip out if the matchup allows it. So turn on Spin the Wheel from Arcane Season 2 on repeat through your headphones, insta-lock the Donger, and see how you get on. Just make sure you don't pick him into Sion or Syndra because they'll yeet your turrets into 2026. Let's get into the jungle next then, and our first underrated pick here is Fiddlesticks. Yes, Fiddlesticks is definitely more popular than some of our other choices in this video, but still massively underrated, and with around a 2.4% pick rate, does not even come close to those popular picks like Lee Sin and Viego, who each have around an 18% plus pick rate. So Fiddle has always been a bit of a one tricky kind of picky. He's a champion you won't really see as often as others, but every time you do, he's diving into your entire team and ending the game in one big team fight. Fiddlesticks has a fairly easy and fast clear that you will want to practice a few times before locking him in solo queue, but it's not too tricky, and all you gotta do is basically rush to level 6 to start using your ultimate every time it's available. Now we've already spoken about objectives and we'll probably mention them time and time again throughout this video because of how important they are this season, but Fiddlesticks is the perfect pick to fight over them each and every time. His biggest difficulty would be timing his fights around those objectives and when his ultimate is ready throughout the early game. But the later it goes on in games, the more often he'll have this ability available, which means he can always find those angles to dive in and win the fight. There's a lot to like about Fiddlesticks. He's relatively simple to pick up and learn once you understand his clears, but his ceiling is super high with his vision control, his passive tricks, and his ability to 1v9. Zyra is our second underrated pick in the jungle this season, and if we made this video 3 months ago, she still would have been a great choice here. She's currently got around about a 1.3% pick rate, but if you haven't tried it yet, then you are seriously missing out. One thing about Zyra is she does have some very obvious strengths and weaknesses. Her strengths are that she clears insanely fast and absolutely melts objectives, to the point where if you get a few plants up and use your ultimate, even the dragon itself will be asking Riot for those plants to be nerfed next patch. Her weakness though is if you're against an aggressive invading jungler, they will often look to punish you by forcing fights against you in your own jungle. And let's be honest, if she doesn't fight around her plants or misses the CC on her E, she's going to struggle in duels most of the time. However, if you play around your teammates and keep your jungle entrances warded, as well as keeping an eye on tracking the enemy jungler's movement, as you should be doing anyway on any champion in any game, then Zyra can be a fantastic pocket pick to play. Our third and final underrated pick in the jungle this season is definitely a wildcard, and it's Yorick. Yes, Yorick's win rate is surprisingly high here at genuinely every single rank, and his pick rate is unsurprisingly extremely low, with around a 0.4% play rate. Now in the jungle, Yorick has a lot to offer. He's better in duels than you might think, and he's also fantastic at taking on multiple enemies alone or with his teammates, as long as he has his maiden available. His damage will genuinely shock you, and not only you, but your enemies as well, as you just don't see Yorick jungle very often. He clears easily, he skirmishes well, he takes objectives very quickly, and he's not even that weak when he's behind either. His main issues are mobility and getting around the map to make sure he's always available. And one thing's for sure, he's very reliant on his maiden to function. Jungle Yorick's ganks are obviously not his strongest point, due to the lack of gap closing or crowd control, but timing his little cage well when enemies don't have summoners isn't really too shabby in reality. So give this a go if you are brave enough and let us know how you get on. Let's move down into the mid lane next then, and our first pick here is Taliyah, who currently has around a 52% win rate and only a 1.9% pick rate. This is based on a Plat Plus ranking here, and as you go lower in the rank, she definitely doesn't have quite as much success, likely due to the nature of her being on the more difficult side. But Taliyah has amazing pushing power, roaming potential, and is a solid pick into dive comps and teams with bruisers and assassins that want to get on top of her and her teammates, because when kiting back in fights, her kit is at its best. She layers her pebbles and combos in front of her to not only deal huge damage, but dish out massive crowd control at the same time. She can split up teams with her ultimate, she has fantastic map mobility with her passive movement speed, and combos amazingly well with other picks who can also abuse those pebbles and her terrain too. The Taliyah and Gnar combo is pretty hard to pull off, but genuinely feels incredible if you can pull it off. Now she's not the kind of pick you will be insta-locking every single game, but if the matchup allows for it, she really is a perfect champion to carry with. And she's a ton of fun, so could be worth putting a bit of time into and see if she rewards you this season. Neeko will forever fit into this category of being underrated, because even before her rework, her stats were always already better than expected, and despite having an amazing creative kit nowadays, she's still criminally underplayed. So let's first just speak about how enjoyable this champion is. She has some of the coolest mechanics in the game with her ability to pretend to be wards or minions of allied champions, and taking a stroll alongside your minion friends before opening up with a huge AoE combo is extremely satisfying. And honestly, it's enough reason to play her alone, without even factoring in her impressive stats at most ranks. She's currently got less than a 1% pick rate in the mid lane. Now she doesn't have the best win rate in gold and below, but as you go higher and higher up, in emerald and above especially, she's currently sitting at around a 52.5% win rate, which is actually up there with some of the highest in the mid lane right now, despite not being very popular whatsoever. So if you enjoy confusing, surprising and exploding your enemies in huge wombo combos, then give Neeko a try. Vel'Koz is our final mid lane pick, and he's definitely the kind of champion you'll see a massive return on investment with. His skill ceiling is surprisingly high, and the tricks and angles you can achieve through lots of practice are not only super fun to play around, but also hugely impactful in key moments. Vel'Koz got some random buffs towards the end of last year, and the few one tricks that do play him are kind of making him look a bit OP. He is vulnerable to dive and hard engage, but has amazing poke and range, which means if you are good enough with your positioning, you can be a bit of a menace. So looking at his stats, his win rate is impressive with around 52.6% across all ranks in the mid lane, as well as similar solid stats in the support role too. Despite this, he only has a 1.4% pick rate too, with around 75,000 games globally recorded at the time of making this video, which when you compare it to Victor, has over 600,000. Now let's be real, Vel'Koz is not easy, and it's pretty easy to play him poorly, but if you want to learn a new mid lane champion that's probably going to be more than viable for the foreseeable future, he's an amazing choice to go for and a great pick to master. Down to the bot lane next then. And no, despite mages all having fantastic stats, we aren't just going to sit here and tell you to play all of these instead of the marksman. However, we are going to include one mage, so let's get that out the way first. And our underrated AP carry to play in the bot lane this patch is Lux. So I've been playing quite a bit of Lux myself because it just feels really strong and it's a lot of fun to play, to be honest. So if your team isn't already stacking AP carries across the board, consider giving it a go. I've had most success playing it alongside supports like Braum or Nami, but you can play it with most picks aside from those that are a bit all or nothing, like Leona for example. This one didn't really feel quite as compatible. Lux has amazing burst and pick potential, solid wave clear, decent scaling, and just an absolutely ridiculous amount of damage. You can often create angles to catch enemies with max range Qs throughout all stages of any game, and sniping down those poor AD carries who are simply just trying to farm under their tower feels both extremely satisfying and also makes you a little bit empathetic at the same time. But hey, LP is LP, a win is a win, and after playing a game hitting a Tahm Kench for 20 minutes on a full item AD carry, you deserve a break. Nilah is our next pick, and let's be real, you could probably say this at any time if you wanted to make this video. Nilah has been underrated for the majority of her career on the Rift so far, and it's probably going to continue to be so. However, she is definitely a bit more matchup and synergy specific, rather than just an underrated pick you can play every champ select. She's got solid stats so far at most ranks, maintaining above a 52% win rate so far this season, and still, she's the least played marksman in the entire game. Nilah does feel a little bit cheesy to play. She's extremely unique in the way that she functions, seeing as she's essentially melee in her Q's downtime. But when you get the hang of her and can pick her in the right games, she feels so enjoyable and really easy to come out on top with. She works best alongside healing and shielding supports due to her passive empowering and sharing those effects, and the other part of her passive also granting more shared experience is also really useful, although it does kind of lose its impact if your supporters completely abandon you every single game. She's more of a team gameplay kind of pick, especially in early 2v2s and fights over dragons. But not only does she have a lot of cool mechanics like her W, she's got great mobility and also has the ability to engage for her team, which not many AD carries can do. Kog'Maw is our final underrated AD carry in today's video, and although he's only got a 2.3% pick rate, his win rate is one of the highest for any AD carry at most ranks. To put this into perspective, the most popular AD carries are Jinx, Ezreal and Caitlyn, and these have around an 18 to 20% pick rate right now, so it's safe to say that Kog'Maw is definitely underplayed. Now to pick Kog optimally, you are aiming for certain conditions really. You want a solid enchanter like Lulu in your back pocket, and you want a comp that you can comfortably play into, as if your enemies have tons of dive and crowd control, you might not be able to play the game. In lane, Kog'Maw has more trading power than most players realise though, as long as he's got the right matchup with his support. And he can surprisingly come out on top much earlier than expected. So he's not just an AFK farm and scale kind of champion, although let's be honest, he is a bit of a machine in the late game. In those big fights later on, Kog'Maw does turn into an artillery turret with some absolutely ridiculous DPS. And if left unchecked, he can completely demolish entire teams without too much trouble. So if you just want to play a hyper carry and have a duo queue buddy who likes playing Lulu, this combo should farm you a ton of LP. Finally, let's have a look at the supports then, and our first underrated pick here has got to be Taric. He's got around about a 52.5% win rate at the moment across all ranks and only a 1.5 pick rate, which makes him the most uncontested but also one of the best performing supports no matter what rank you are. Well, Taric has and will always be an underrated pick, and unless he gets a major rework, this is going to be the case for a long time. Taric has amazing synergies with plenty of different champions, especially those that can combine together with some chain CC, with the mage Taric bot lane and Swain being very hard to play against, but also AD carries like Nilah, who we mentioned earlier, who can reliably dash in with Taric's stun, ready to force fights whenever they want to. Another really fun combo is Taric and Kalista, as that Taric ultimate on a fed Kalista later on feels pretty hard to kill. His main weakness, however, is going to be ranged peel and sustain, with picks like Janna and Sona punishing his low range really hard, especially if his stun misses. But realistically, there's not too many lanes you can't come out on top of. Speaking of Sona, she's going to be our next underrated champion, and she actually has the highest pick rate of any champion in this video so far, with around a 2.5% pick rate. But that's not to say she isn't underrated, and when you compare her to those contested popular picks like Lulu, who has nearly a 15% win rate, you'll see the huge gulf in popularity. Sona truly is one of the most consistent supports you can play. Now, she's not necessarily going to 1v9 and snowball and hard carry from this role, but she's just an amazing addition into any team comp. She brings fantastic scaling and sustain, and her utility will always be useful, especially later the games go on. She's got relentless buffs and heals, and landing those big 5-man ultimates feels incredibly satisfying in major teamfights. So Sona may not be the flashiest of supports. You're not often going to be featured in big outplay montages, but if you want to have a very reliable pick, then you cannot go wrong with Sona. Fun fact too, that Sona has been the least banned champion in the game for years now. And so far this season, she's only banned in 0.13% of all games played at all ranks in all regions. Pretty insane. Our third and final underrated support pick to play this patch, and the last champion in this video, is Elise. We mentioned in our tier list video that she's gathering some popularity in this role, and it's safe to say she's really proving herself as a top cheesy pocket pick to play as a support if you can play to her strengths. Elise is all about early aggression with big stuns and dives, and pretty heavy early burst damage too. But it's not just about the lane phase, because her roaming is top tier. She's always been one of the best tower diving gankers in the game due to her stun, her point and click damage, and more importantly, her ability to drop tower aggro with her repel. So, as a support, you can skitter around the map, ganking every single lane and getting your whole team ahead without having to worry about losing out on experience and keeping up with jungle tempo. Elise is not the most consistent support in the game, so if you want an aggressive player, there's plenty of other better picks for you. But if you want to play like a psycho spider and 1v9, Elise can be a super enjoyable cheesy pick to play. Well, there we have it, guys. That wraps up our video of 3 underrated picks to play in every role in Season 2025. Now, remember, some of these champions are more niche or situational than others, so some you'll need to be careful of blind picking every game. But if you're craving a new pick to play, why not give one of them a go? Thanks for sticking around and watching this video, guys. We hope you enjoyed it, and best of luck in your solo queue adventures. Don't forget before you go to click the link below to check out the top builds and runes for all of these champions featured, and we'll catch you all in the next one. Take care.